Okay, business calculus, let's do some review problems from matrices. So I'm not going to do the adding or subtracting matrices. I think you can manage those yourselves, but we will do a multiplying and an inverse matrix. So to multiply two matrices, remember you have to check that the number of terms in a row of your first matrix is the same as the number of terms in the columns of your second matrix. So since this is a 2 by 3 and a 3 by 2, as long as the internal numbers match, you can multiply, and your answer will be the outside numbers. So these two you can multiply. So to get your first term of your 2 by 2 answer, you have to take row 1 times column 1, and you multiply each piece and add them together. So -3 times -3, -4 times -2, and 0 times 3, add them all together. To get the rest of the terms, you repeat this process. For row 1, column 2's term, you multiply row 1 by column 2. So that'd be -3 times 1, plus -4 times 0, plus 0 times 5. Lucky for us, two of those numbers are 0, so it's just -3 times 1, which is -3. Now you also have to do it for the second row. So row 2 times column 1 would be 214 times -3, -2, and 3. So 2 times -3 plus 1 times -2 plus 4 times 3. That's -6 minus 2 plus 12, which is 4. And of course, to get the last term, you have to do the last row by the last column. So 2 times 1 plus 1 times 0 plus 4 times 5 to get 22. And so this is your product of the two matrices. Now remember that if you do the first one times the second one and the second one times the first one, you can get two different answers most of the time. On the problem where it asks you to show that they're inverses, remember to show inverses, they both ways have to multiply to the identity matrix, which is just ones across the diagonal and zeros everywhere else. Now we're going to do the inverse of the 2 by 2 as well. So let's find the inverse of 3, 5, 1, -1. So remember, to do inverses, you set it up across from the identity, and then you have to turn the left side into the identity and see what that does to the right side. So your goal for inverses is to turn the top left term and every diagonal into 1 and everything else into 0. So you start there. How do I turn a 3 into a 1? I have to divide that whole row by 3. So 3 divided by 3 is 1. 5 divided by 3 is 5/3. 1 divided by 3 is 1/3. 0 divided by 3 is 0. Your other row does not change. Now, before you do anything else, you have to zero out the rest of this column. So I wanted a 0 here. In order to do that, I have to take row 2 and subtract row 1, because row 1 and row 2 have the same number. So how do I cancel out a 1? I subtract 1, or I add a -1. If you want to add the negative of row 1, that's the same thing. Okay, so 1 minus 1 is 0. -1 minus 5/3 is -8/3. 0 minus 1/3 is -1/3. 1 minus 0 is 1. Okay, so now I've zeroed out the rest of this column. My next goal is, again, to get the diagonals to be 1, which is kind of unpleasant in this problem because we have a -8/3. But remember, to get to 1, you take anything and you divide it by itself. So -8/3 divided by -8/3, or you can multiply by the reciprocal. So -8/3 times -3/8. Either way, you get the same answer. So here, 0 divided by anything is 0. Anything divided by itself is 1. Now, -1/3 divided by -8/3 is the same as -1 divided by -8, which becomes +1/8. And 1 divided by -8/3 is actually -3/8. So multiplying by the reciprocal. So this whole row is done for now. This column is done. The only thing left floating around is that 5/3. That also needs to become 0. So in order to get 5/3 into 0, I have to subtract 5/3 times row 2, because that's the only thing that has a 1 in it for me to work with. So row 1 minus 5/3 of row 2. Over here I did some math. Remember, 5/3 times 1/8, because I'm going to have to multiply this whole row by 5/3. 5 times 1 is 5. 3 times 8, 24. 5/3 times negative 3/8. The 3's will cancel, so it'll just become negative 5/8. Okay, so 5/3 minus 5/3 is 0. So this part is finished. It's about calculating the rest. So 1/3 needs to subtract 5/24. Now, in order to subtract two fractions, you need a common denominator. 1/3 is 8 divided by 24 minus 5 over 24. Subtract across the numerator. 8 minus 5 is 3. So this is 3 divided by 24, or 3/24. It can reduce to 1/8. The second one is just 0 minus negative 5/8. 0 minus a negative is really 0 plus 5/8, so it's just 5/8. So the inverse matrix of 3, 5, 1, negative 1, it's what's left over here on the right side when the left side gets to the identity, which is 1/8, 5/8, 1/8, negative 3/8. In the next video, I will do the inverse of the 3 by 3 and 1 graphing inequalities.